Hey folks, and welcome today to my Beta Studies look at Torghast, a new type of content to try in the Shadowlands. This is going to be both from a neutral perspective and then from a Resto Druid point of view, so let's get started. So we're going to start off by talking about what Torghast is, then how to unlock it, then how it works both in systems and play, before finally looking at it from a Resto Druid solo point of view. So Torghast is in many ways a successor to the horrific visions of 8.3, in that they serve as content you can flexibly do with 1 to 5 players. Like visions, the state of the mobs inside change depending on your numbers and role. For example, as a healer, the mobs will deal more damage but have less health, so you can kill them at the same speed as a DPS player might. Also like visions, they relate to legendary acquisition, and every week there will be different locations to the week before, but the similarities stop there. Whereas Visions had a time limit and near identical each run, Torghast does not have a timer. Instead, it allows your party 5 deaths before the run ends, and each run varies whenever you start it. Unlike Visions, which required a resource to enter, you can try Torghast as much as you like. Before we start on the outside systems and gameplay, let's talk about unlocking Torghast. Once you reach level 60 and have chosen a Covenant, you will have access to the first week of the Covenant campaign. After doing it, maybe 2 to 3 hours of work, you'll be directed back to Oribos, and from there, back to the Maw and Torghast. From there then, you have one tutorial run to do. This tutorial run goes through all the basics of gameplay and features, but first we will look at how the non-gameplay features work. Torghast has 2 main wings open each week. You can run each wing as many times as you want, and the only difference is the environments and the type of enemies in each. When you enter a wing, you will have a choice of which layer, currently 1 to 8. Layers are basically the difficulty, just like Mythic Plus. They increase the attack and health of enemies, and whenever you complete a run on the highest layer you do, the next layer opens up. Note that your party can run the layer that is the highest available to any party member, and layers cross over between all wings and weeks. That means in say week 1, if one member of your party, Bob, is busy at work and doesn't have much time to play, other members can unlock layers on their own, and then when Bob comes back from work, he can join in and not miss out on anything. This is because whenever you complete a run, you earn rewards from all the previous floors as well, assuming you have not already obtained them this week. And what are these rewards? Soul Ash, 100 of which is required for every legendary you make or upgrade. Speaking of, let's look at the Soul Ash figures. As you can see, as you work up the layers, you get less from each floor. The bare minimum you should really look at each week is at least layer 2. Since 2 wings are open each week and do not share rewards, this will get you 50 Soul Ash, 25 from each, half of which will be required for a legendary. This means by week 2 you will have your first legendary. If you want to push though, and Torghast will be the hardest content available to you during the pre-raiding and Mythic Plus weeks, you can get a legendary week 1, if you manage to clear both layer 8s available during the first week of Shadowlands. By the time you get to layer 5 without some good gear, it will start to be noticeable how dangerous the mobs are. It will be tough, but if your team is solid or your solo gameplay is top tier, it is certainly possible and the reward is well worth it. Really though, you should just push as far as you can during the pre-season weeks. Even if you can't get the 100, the closer you get, the better. Now let's get onto the runs themselves, starting with the tutorial, which shows off most of the features you'll encounter. The tutorial took about 20 minutes for me, but a main run can last a lot longer as you go up the difficulty. The tutorial, just like every other main run, has 6 floors, with vendors on floor 3 and 6, and a boss on floor 6. At the start of your run, you'll encounter your first Anima power, these black and white clouds. These generally give you a choice of abilities depending on your class, spec, and covenant. From my experience, the first Anima power is always set, so trying to reset the run to get a better starting power won't work. These powers come in a number of rarities, and the roguelike aspect of Torghast, you build your build different each time, and favour it to how you prefer to play. Some powers stack, so you can select them multiple times. Others do not stack, and I believe in recent builds you can no longer get multiples of the powers that cannot stack. During this first floor, you'll find souls that you can rescue. Each soul you rescue gives you a 1% increase to your primary stat, and this stacks. You'll mainly encounter more sworn enemies during this tutorial. These appear in most number of wings, so get used to fighting them. Namely the guards who have cone attack, which at later layers will deal fatal damage if not dodged. On floor 2 you will encounter your first traps, ground effects to dodge, as well as vases. Destroying these vases grants Phantasm, as do all enemies you loot. We'll touch on this later. Another enemy type to mention are Morats. Easy enemies, these appear in every wing and run away often, however their deaths work for a few Anima powers. At the ends of floor 1, 2, 4 and 5 you will encounter an empowered enemy. These serve as a mini-boss and they have the same abilities as their mob type and always drop an Anima power. Floor 3 has no enemies, only souls, vases and a vendor. These vendors sell potions and Anima powers for Phantasm. Considering Phantasm disappears when you leave Torghast, be sure to spend. Of special note are also the epic items, one of which gives you a choice of Anima powers, the others which you can throw at a non-elite to kill it and transform it into an Anima power. These powers that you get from throwing it are based on the enemy that you threw it at. A few powers are bland, but wing-specific enemies can grant amazing powers, such as fire damage reduced by 65% when everyone uses fire damage. Also, you can use them on the vendors. Cruel, but it is possible. I guess that is it for the Dark Souls inspiration, and hey, there is an achievement to end the run with 1,000 Phantasms, so, this gets you 400. On floor 4 you will encounter a bonus objective. These involve escorting an ally that you rescue to an item or another captive. Completing this rewards the bonus Anima power, and on later layers may reward a follower for your Covenant mission table. If you miss recruiting any new followers, however, you can find them waiting for you in the Torghast waiting room. And also, there's more traps on floor 4, which can kill you. Floor 5 shows off even more new traps. Be aware that some traps have the levers to turn them off. Also on this floor, you'll encounter your first treasure chest. These come in 3 varieties, but you'll only see one here. This first type has 4 layers that all need to be set in a specific order. I haven't found a way to tell which way, as I miss it here, but if you get into a routine and work through methodically, you'll be fine. The second involves 4 icons and 4 locks. Each icon relates to a lock, and clicking each icon changes a number of other icons. One icon will change all 4, one icon changes 3, but not the one that changed all 4, one changes 2, but not the previous 2, and the last only changes itself. Sounds complex, but really it means you need to find the one that changes all 4, click it until its lock is open, then click the one that changes 3 of them until its lock is open, and finally repeat for the last 2. The final type of chest just involves clicking keys spread across the floor. Floor 6 is the final floor of every run, and it features a last vendor and then the boss. There's no trash on this floor. The tutorial boss does not drop your soul ash, but every other end run boss will drop the soul ash in question. After a quick trip back to do some quests, you'll be ready for Torghast proper, starting at layer 1. Most of what you've encountered before will still be around, but from now on all the layouts are randomised, as are the enemies, events, chests and rares, each taken from a viable mobs in the wing you're in. In Torghast proper, however, you'll begin to encounter new threats. Some wings will have elites that appear. These can spawn fairly close to each other, pulling them separately is key, and managing their mechanics. Cooldowns can be worth using on them, especially while your Anima powers are lower on lower floors. Of special note are the skeletons that have a large haste and movement speed reduction aura. Getting stronger the closer you are to them, they can be really nasty. As you run to the higher layers, you'll find elites gaining a stacking buff that increases their damage and eventually making them immune to crowd control effects. Also, you'll begin to encounter rares. These are generally alone, and while they do have mechanics, they are not too dangerous if done correctly. They will always drop Anima powers, pretty much relating to their abilities or the win you are in. Generally they are fairly unique and almost always worth it. On layer 3 onwards you will encounter torments. These are debuffs that change depending on your wing, from spawning ads while out of combat to dealing fire damage over time. These increase in stats as you go up the floors except for 3. They also increase in power much like the enemies as you do on higher level runs. Occasionally you may find NPCs fighting. Both sides are hostile to you, and these can be pretty nasty if you aggro too much. Avoiding AoEing is normally key, as is being at ranged. But if you aggro too much, you may need to kite. Or strip, you don't have to kill everything. Phantasm is good, but surviving is also important. If you are worried about a dangerous pack, strip it. Lastly, you may find a few stealth mobs or mimics that look like Anima powers. They are rare, but they do show that you need to stay healthy. Once you complete your first main run of Torghast, you will find an item that starts a quest chain leading to the Rune Carver, your legendary crafter. His room is just off the main Torghast lobby, close to the entrance. If you want to know how to craft a legendary, check out my introduction in the video in the card up here. But you'll need more soul ash to craft one, as mentioned, all the way up to layer 8 if you want one in the first week. A few other things to mention as well. You can't change talents during a Torghast run, but there is what I would call a waiting area which leads to all the wings. This has a summoning stone and is a rested area. Also, in a recent build, new items that permanently help in Torghast were added to a Moor vendor for reputation. So this should make Torghast easier over time, but if you clear it week 1, then who needs them? My Druid Heart is about to take over, but my advice for all classes is take it slow, careful and safe. Speed is rarely important. Pull carefully, look out, learn the traps, and when in danger, be prepared to kite. The start is always the hardest. Once you have a few Anima powers, it will get easier, so don't be disheartened. Some wings will be harder for you than others depending on your class or spec. You may find Exploding Skeletons tough, or healing reduction casts. Maybe opponent dot. It's why I'd recommend a group. You can do it solo of course, but a group helps to cover those weaknesses. Right, so if you are here just for a Torghast explainer for any class, this is where my Resto Druid guide takes over. For Resto Druid solo, I'd recommend Feral Affinity. However, on later layers, can involve quite a bit of kiting, balance will also work. On those later floors, you can just kite enemies with Sunfire and Moonfire, and for that, pretty much any affinity works. Before we go into Anima powers, be aware Sunfire and Moonfire are your strongest tools, and one of the reasons is their ability to pull instantly. One of the most common pull types will involve 2 elites standing close, surrounded by non-elites. If you start off by attacking the elites, the entire pack tends to aggro, but you can pick off the non-elites around the outside. Another trick with these packs is Sunfire. Most of the time, if you manage to use Sunfire on a non-elite, you can sometimes aggro one of the elites with a splash dot, but the second elite won't aggro. Sometimes. Sunfire's splash aggro has always been a bit weird. The ability to split these elites is important though, sometimes kiting and rooting can also do it. The other thing to be careful of is your health. Don't be afraid to spend time healing and let your dots do the work. Traps can deal a lot of damage if you get hit, and if it happens, just get to safety and heal up. In many ways your ability to heal efficiency out of combat makes Torghast very smooth for you. In fact, I think Resto Druid might actually be pretty solid. I won't list all the Anima powers you can acquire, but we'll go through the major categories I would class them under, and the different playstyles and spells they focus on. Anything works, but the more you can combine the synergize, the better. Also, I won't mention epics until the end, as they are fairly rare and can't really be relied upon. I generally prioritise offensive powers over defensives, but defensives are worth more than the movement speed ones. I would pass on pretty much every movement speed one. Your survival and time to kill is more important. If you are worried about how much damage is coming in, and a lot of it will be coming in at later layers, take survival traits instead, or just, get a good balance. First up are the damaging procs, and for me, they're my main priority if they appear. Whether it's holy damage, frost damage, or a shadow dot, these can proc off any of your damage, so work it with pretty much every style. You really can't build around them, but they help every build, so are worth taking. Just like procs on trinkets, their numbers are balanced for DPS players, so with your healer enemy health totals, they will be powerful. Next up are the dot focused ones. After the damaging procs, my preferred approach. The king here is Circlet of Weeds. It works just like Circle of Life and Death. Dots tick 33% quicker. Also here you can find damaging buffs if Moonfire and the other dots are on single targets or multiple targets. Should also mention here as well a defensive one which causes Moonfire to decrease the damage the target deals by 20%. Overall, whatever approach you move forwards with, dots will always be a part of it, and that is why I tend to favour the dot powers. Next up is your Covenant powers. A few Anima powers will increase its power. I did this as a Night Fae, as I'm sure many of you will, so you can grab cooldown reductions, increased power and the stack, and turning Convoke into an elite killing machine. One build I generally don't lean towards are Entangling Roots. These add damage or resistance to breaking, but my main concern is the single target. Roots can only be cast on one target, and with elites being more CC resistant, I don't think it's the approach to take if you can help it, but I'm sure that something can come out of it, especially if you go with Balance Affinity. A good combo you may not think at first is the Barkskin group. It may not seem like an offensive power, but with Cloak of Thorns, Barkskin gains the Thorns effect, dealing damage whenever you're attacked. Combined with another that increases Barkskin's duration, you can eventually get a full uptime on this Thorns effect. Pull a few enemies and just keep healing yourself up as the enemies kill themselves. Next up are a few generic ones such as Growl increasing damage when ending or gaining bonus stats in forms. These are generally nothing special, but some of them are going to be better than ones you really don't want to take. Also, I want to touch on the Morat ones here, exploding when they die or giving you maximum health whenever you kill them that stacks up. They may not seem like the best, but I think they hold up better than they look on paper. The last type you'll see are Phantasm base. Some gain Phantasm, some increase the rate you'll earn, but my favourite has to be gaining a shield when you obtain Phantasm. This shield will effectively always be active. Lastly for powers, we'll touch on a few epics. You won't see many, but a few are quite impactful. Personal favourites include Heart of the Wild always being active. Another being a 50% damage boost, however your healing and damage slows you down, luckily you can shift out of the slow. Casting Barkskin whenever you enter humanoid form is a great one with the Thorns effect. And a last favourite is a large damage boost on a target with 3 or more dots on them, good for those nasty elites. So how easy are Torghast runs, at least on beta? Well, armed with a full set of campaign gear, raid trinkets and a full soulbind, I failed only once on my way to clearing layer 8, but some came close and some wins are certainly harder than the other. The fire wing with a permanent dot on you is really no harm to you, but in another wing there are shades that cast a uninterruptible cast because you're a healer, that reduces healing done, stacking all the way up to 100 after 4 casts. Generally casters are your biggest weakness with no interrupt. Taking them out quickly is usually the key, or using line of sight to neglect some of that damage. But what about those without beta powers? Well, using a character to mimic what life will be like, I started with weaker soulbinds. Only the 2 that you would have from the first week of the Covenant campaign. I also wore gear that is equivalent to what you would get from finishing questing. That means weaker than you'll get from normal or heroic dungeons, all which will be available in week 1. Still, floor 5 was doable but quite a challenge. However, that didn't stop me. I pushed all the way to layer 8 and did clear it. Now, I've had a lot of practice, it was long, just under 50 minutes, and I likely got lucky with Anima powers, but all this means is that if I can do it, you can do it too, and it will only get easier as you get more gear and Covenant bonuses. Thank you very much for watching. If you want more Shadowlands beta content, be sure to check the playlist, and if you want more in the future, the subscribe button is waiting for your press. I know I am really looking forward to Torghast and what it represents for a solo healer content, so I hope you all enjoy it too when Shadowlands launches. See you there.